philosopher as well. And that's why I think in Europe as a whole, the European Enlightenment, Goethe and people loved Shakespeare and translated him into German and so on. He was a European thinker, and I'm sure he'd spent a lot of time travelling abroad, which is why he could bring that range. Now, yes, of course he was friends with Bacon and others, but I don't think it means that his pen wasn't the guiding force. But, you know, I'm willing to debate. Jacobi and Mark Rylance said they wanted a public debate about Shakespeare or not. Well, I'm willing to take them on here. But the point I'm making really is that that's who Britain, you know, that's what we stand for as a culture, is our poets. Shakespeare being one of the most preeminent, but all the others. And that's what I want our country to go down in history for. Not some sort of petty, greedy nation of shopkeepers that think Brexit is the best idea in the world. The reason I'm so against Brexit is it's so anti-poetic. There's such a beauty about the idea of European Union that I can travel as a bard from Loch Lomond, where I used to live nearby, all the way to southern Italy and share poems and put on little plays in, you know, town squares and sit in tavernas and chat to people from all over this continent and not be hassled by the police checking on my status, have I got the right passport and stuff. I want to live in a world which is free and open for poets to roam. And that's why I so utterly oppose the ignorance of Brexit. That's why I totally support the soul of the Scots, which is rising against this nonsense and has said that you see, Scotland has always been a European, intellectually poetic infused people. And if you think of the early Celtic times, when the Celts were in all over Britain and Ireland and all over Gaul and all the way down to Austria, Switzerland, you know, Bards and Druids were wandering freely in those times, with duties of upholding peace and you know, duties of telling the truth. The purpose of poetry and bardism is to tell the truth, to bear witness to power. They were also the diplomats of the time, and still should be, in my opinion. So I'm totally with Shakespeare and the bards, and I want to reclaim our country for the mysteries, and the greatest mystery of all is peace. You know, there's a 1,000 plays to be written for the future about how we finally defeated ignorance as a planet, how we got through this time of tragedy and coronavirus, how we defeated Brexit and the petty narrow-mindedness it stands for, how we got rid of xenophobic people that are bragging about their nation or their race or their religion and failing to understand that the greatest wisdom is to see the universality of every particular. So it's not that, you know, this tree is better than that tree. They're all in one great forest, and that is the language of the bards, the language of peace. Okay? So that's yeah, I wanted to say that. And I'm going to read from volume 3 of my poems here. And I'm just kind of picking more or less as the gods dictate. Okay, this looks quite fun. Right, it's called The Languages of Leaves. It's poem 498 in my 1,000 poems. We go across worlds searching for love. We travel back and beyond to infinity, over and over, searching for the note that makes sense, the one calling, the whistle we recognize, the smell of the beloved that's familiar and rare at once, like blue oxygen. When you've been off the planet on a far journey with guiding angels. On our journeys, we must listen in to the conversations of leaves, a language learned with difficulty, by sitting under trees, alongside the way, whether at Dodona, at Struga, in Kos, or Russell Square. Also in ordinary places, in motorway service lots. Their rustlings as speaking a common language. There's the long, slow swell of willows, like the sighing of the sea at autumn. There's the cackling of olives when they are whipped by a sudden squall. There's the deep sonority of oaks, gentle and thunderous at once, like a Welsh choir. I hear these voices at night. I become the clouds and shine light above them. And they report to me in their myriad voices, infinite styles, but with one saying. They tell me of weeping. They tell me when lovers, at the end of their tether, come and sit beneath them and shed a few tears. They tell when a Buddha-to-be has come to sit for the last time before enlightenment. They tell the secret language of poets, that each of them heard, always stupendous, and yet ever so silent, almost a nothing. A creaking of boughs in the forest of Arden, a crashing of oaks amidst lightning in the dark wood above the inferno, a cracking of twigs in the beech woods on the downs, whence Kipling surveyed his magic empire unfurling, a twinkling of the silver bell on the branch behind which Luch laughed, just besides Ben Bulben, a quiet plumpness on the fruit of the vines along the coast at Castle Duino, where the great coast sweeps all time together in its blue-white shoals. A trembling of the ashes of the green glades, marking the entrance to the caves through where the Styx runs. Our bodies come and go. Our thoughts shimmer like the brief glory of sunset over the Adriatic waters. Our conversations and communications become twisted and tangled as the talk of men and women who don't understand each other and who fear rather than love. Our moments become unravelled and our dreams slowly become forgotten. Yet the language of rustling and creaking and swishing will live on forever. It is life's hymn, melancholy and gay at once, young and old, eternal, Kore, crone, mother. It is the wizard's wand of apple, wood which he points at you now to awaken to your own hearing of it. It is the Sibylline book which will not be offered again so generously. Next time, the poem will be shorter. So, I rather like that poem. I love them all. I kind of remember writing that. I think I wrote that in Slovenia after just visiting Castle Duino, which is where Rilke came from. Well, he wrote his Duino elegies there, which had a big impact on me as a young poet. And it's what is awesome in life is to go to the places where poets have hung out and been inspired and to kind of pick up on the energy. It's something I love to do. That's why I went to places like Smyrna where Homer was, and I've always been in the track of these poets. I want to talk now a bit about my experience of the Celtic world and living in Scotland, because I'd always loved Scotland. I used to go there as a boy to summer camps and things, but I never lived there for long. And likewise in Wales, again, I'd gone there for holidays. My uncle had married a Welshwoman, and so we used to go for Christmases and things. But actually living in Wales for 10 years and then living in Scotland for 7 years, communing with the bardic spirit of the Celts, travelling to Ireland back and forth quite a few times across the Irish Sea, it gave me a sort of deep insight into why the Celtic poetic imagination is so important, why the goddess is so deep in the Celtic soul, and how that ancient poetry still comes down. It was like peeking into the room from which Robert Graves derived his own inspiration. And that whole poetic of the White Goddess was, in a sense, brought home to me living in those places, and meeting with bards, meeting with poets, going to conferences and poetry moots and so on. I discovered that this is a living tradition, this poetic tradition in the Celtic world, in Ireland, in Scotland, in Wales. And it's also in Britain. I mean, it's the English are not stupid. We've learned. I mean, I'm typical. I'm part English, part Celtic, and I've learned in my family to respect and revere the muses of all the cultures of the British Isles. Now, what I think, and this is why when I was in Scotland and subsequently, I'm so against Brexit, because, and why I've been doing a weekly fast for the last over a year, because it's a stake through the heart of the poetic genius of Britain, which depends on this intercultural blending of traditions, which are Celtic, partly English, Anglo-Saxon, Norman, Viking, Welsh, Scottish, Gaelic, Pictish, Irish, and now all the more recent, immigrants from all over the world, which make London and Britain such a vibrant and marvellous place. Well, we can't be rude to the Celtic soul that voted against Brexit in the referendum and wants a second referendum, and if not, they want their independence. Well, to me, that is a poetic project, and as a Druid for peace, I think that that has to be. They have to have their second referendum, and I think there's only two ways this can end, this Brexit nonsense. And I speak, someone like Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings, they have no poetry in them at all. They have no sense of justice or right. You see, the fundamental duty of a poet is to speak the truth, and to bear witness to that from a transpersonal realm, from the realm of the muses. These people have no knowledge, and I think it's a problem with the civil service. I think they're buttressed by a whole team of people. I've met civil servants, quite senior ones. They never think outside the box, they never think uncautiously, they never think ethically. They only think in terms of power, control, stability, and so on. Now, this is a false anti-poetic way of thinking, and it's summed up in the catastrophe that Brexit is, which was an unpoetic, dangerous project from day one, but dressed up to look like something magnificent. Britain going independent and so on. Well, no, it's nonsense, because half of Britain, the ancientness of Britain, the Celtic traditions, voted against this, and yet, if we ignore them, if Westminster and the English ignore that voice, then it will bifurcate the land in two. So there's two ways this can end. That's how I see it. One is we can hear that voice finally, and the British people. I mean, Dominic Cummings should resign tomorrow. The man was breaking all the rules. I mean, what else has he got to do to go? He should be gone. The evil genius behind all this, and there should be a second referendum. and that's why I proposed the constitutional reform for the UK to make that possible. I've written in the last week to every single opposition or political leader, and said, will you support my constitutional reform initiative, which is, you can see it on the website. I'll wait back and hear. My duty is to speak truth to power in poetry and prose both. This week also I've been commemorating a bit late the Declaration of Arbroath, because when I lived in Scotland and got to know Scottish people and loved them, I realised this incredible declaration is still really a live thing for them. As growing up in Brighton and London, you never taught this stuff. The Declaration of Arbroath happened in 1320 when the Scottish were fighting for their independence. They'd won the Battle of Bannockburn near Stirling under Robert Bruce, but the English still wouldn't recognise them as a separate independent nation. So in despair they wrote to the Pope, who was then in Avignon, John the 22nd, I believe, and they catalogued all the wrong things that the English had done in invading Scotland. And it may surprise some, English patriots to know that the English troops had been pretty nasty in Scotland. And they list them all. And they say, we will never submit to these English. They do not rule us. They have no right. They say Scotland was an independent, free kingdom long before the English ever turned up. I mean, the English just landed from the North Sea in about, 400 AD and came in as scavengers and mercenaries, with an inability to understand that, in fact, not force but dharma is the path of the correct procedure in life. It took them a while. They eventually adopted Christianity, but I think the English got Christianity only skin deep. They got it as a sort of either a ritual thing, like a sort of performance art, or as a kind of habit, because the monarch does it, so we'll do it, as a sort of court promotion project. And neither of those is authentic Christianity. Authentic Christianity is a totally different soul transformative shamanic druid gnosis, which sweeps over you if you do your studies properly and if you commune with the Holy Spirit, and you can get it through the rituals, you can get it through the traditional Gospels, but you have to go much deeper. The beauty of Christ is that he was also a poet, and he put his teachings into imagery, into parables, and into poetry. And if you go to the land where he was, which I visited, Galilee and Jerusalem and so on, it's an inspirational poetic landscape. No wonder he was coming out with such gems, right? So to me, the dishonouring of that Celtic soul in my country's tradition, Britain and Ireland, is at the root of my opposition to Brexit, because it's a poetic catastrophe. My country is going to be taken over by nincompoop traffic warden types that have stolen power and that fine everybody for talking about poetry. I mean, anyone with any sense should be doing a Robin Hood and going into the woods and organising resistance. I don't mean using the longbow. I mean using the long word, the arrow of truth. All the Robin Hoods out there, and the Maid Marians, we need to start talking truth to each other and start sharing poetry, because that's the only way we can save our country, or these nincompoops are going to take over. And this is like the people that are running the cabinet now. I mean, these are false politicians. They haven't got a bone of integrity to share among them. They're like the three sisters with no eye. Or one eye, I think, to share amongst them. And talking of which, I'm reading a very interesting book, and you must read this book, by Chris Wiley. This is a book about poetry and science and the intersection. And it's about how his work for Cambridge Analytica and Steve Bannon won the Brexit vote, and how they did it exactly. He details it. Chris Wiley, thanks for revealing the secrets. Chris is a bit of a poet himself. He's the guy that likes wearing, pink or lilac hair. And he's shocked at what happened to his work and how it was stolen and misapplied. Now, it was misapplied by the Mercers, who are the billionaires funding the whole project, and their cronies. By Steve Bannon, who was like the warlock in charge. And one of the saddest, tragicest things of the whole book so far is that Steve Bannon is quoted by Chris Wiley, who got to know him very well, as someone who apparently, quote unquote, believed, in the religious view of culture and professed to believe in Dharma. I'd be very happy to have a public debate with Steve Bannon anytime, on the internet. Give us a ring. Because, my dear chap, you've completely lost the plot as opposed to understanding the adharmic nature of Brexit. By creating these false personality trait tracking devices, which is how they were using the internet, to go into micro detail on everyone's life, and then sending them persuasive advertising to make them vote for Brexit. This is, as Chris Wiley points, this is, a mind FCK. But that is how advertising people think. That's the kind of consciousness we're up against. And against it, all I can say, we have to rally the poets. Because these are the technocrats that have taken over our world. And now it's the same guys that are inventing the next generation of nuclear weapons. It's the same guys in the Pentagon advising Trump to tear up every peace treaty America's ever signed because then they can make new super weapons. It's the same guys who are inventing biological warfare and chemical warfare and now information warfare. This book reveals that basically Brexit was won by military intervention, psychological warfare against the British people. Organised by this guy Alexander Nix, who's an old Etonian who calls people from Africa niggers. The guy is a sort of old racist, old school who should be in prison actually for what he's done. And what I've written to the heads of the oppositional parties throughout the UK, including the SNP, all the Irish oppositional parties, and the Lib Dems and Labour and Greens, is to say that there has to be legislation to stop this ever happening again. So when there is finally a second referendum on Brexit and on Scottish independence and so on, these dark warlords can't fake it yet again, because what they're thinking is they've cracked democracy. They've worked out how to interfere with people's voting choices, and that's it. They can any result they want, they can engineer now. So okay, if they allow a Scottish independence referendum, they're planning that they will so barrage the public of Scotland with anti-independence messages that they'll vote to stay in the Union. And that's why they've been targeting Alex Salmond in the courts, and also now Craig Murray, because these people have the courage to speak up for truth. Going back to the Declaration of Arbroath, listen to the documentary about that. Recently, because it's the 700th anniversary. That was in 1320, and it was a declaration by the Scottish people to the Pope, as I said, saying we want independence because these English have no sense of justice and fair play. It's ironic that the English, I was brought up to believe that the English believed in fair play. I was taught to play cricket, and that was the myth I was taught at Brighton College, a very good public school, a little mini Eton. That we told the truth, we were just, and that we were fair. Well, I'm still sticking to those rules. It seems to me some other people, like the Alexander Nix types, have flunked on their ethics exams. I don't know where these people... It's disgraceful that they should be, in any way, having their hands on levers of power like this. And of course they've done alliances with dark forces in America, which is basically dog eat dog, the rich rule, and the rest can go, hang themselves, and literally some of them do. I was deeply impressed by Democracy Now!'s interview with an amazing, we call them vicars, an English word. A vicar is like a minister of the church. This guy's a American Christian leader, Bob, I can't remember his full name, who's leading the Poor Person's March on Washington, which is going to be digital. I mean, he's so eloquent about how COVID is hitting the poor, mostly in the black communities in America, and and yet these Brexit types are doing deals with the rich whites who run the elite system, which is keeping these people down. So yeah, it's the only way we can resist this, the mind F-U-C-K, is through actualizing the heart of intuition and spirit, and that's where poetry comes from. That's our secret weapon. I'm speaking to the poets out there who understand me, the muses, people that have been touched by the Arwen, the divine, transpersonal madness, or what's called transrational in some schools of conflict resolution. I've just been in touch with a wonderful master's degree in peace studies that's going at the University of Innsbruck in Austria, and there's a wonderful guy. He's like an Austrian specialist in peace studies. They have students from all over the world, and they're talking now about transrational dimension of conflict resolution. They're taking the students and doing shamanic, workshops and things. Well, this is what I was doing 20 years ago. And that's why I wrote my thesis on peace and the transpersonal. We need to factor back into history the transpersonal dimension, and that's where poetry comes from. It's where true philosophy comes from, inspired philosophy, and it's where the sacred scriptures of mankind come from. It's where the Quran comes from, the Bible, the Vedas. I'm doing a commentary on the Upanishads at the moment, and they are pure, divine, inspired, revelatory scriptures. So anyway, I wanted to share a bit of that. Now, having said all that, I also set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Britain and Ireland, because part of my work is the sort of receiving of the divine, as it were, and then part is the anchoring that in institutional structures and contexts. So what I've been doing is activating that in specific things. So I'm just going to deal with that, and I'll be back in a second.